Can you talk a little bit about how you build a business and what has kind of guided your strategy? Man, I understand part of it is what you just explained to us, of course, and doing that probably with multiple leaders, but what can you tell us about building business? I think it's a big term sometimes that we hear, but I'd love to get kind of some of the things that you've done to help build it.
Leadership is influence. If you can influence somebody, then you've actually led them. And then the question becomes, how do you gain this influence? People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And so you actually have to care about people. It would probably be smart to organize your leadership structure in manageable spans of care. And the way that I did it, the way that we did it, we never had any more than.
It's not easy being a leader as a technical professional, but in today's episode, we've got some amazing leadership tips for you from an amazing leader in the industry. I have with me today Craig Casey, Vice President of Corporate Risk Management at Burns & McDonnell, and Craig is going to talk about three very specific things: how to build up people as a technical leader, how to build business, which is really important, and how to have those tough conversations around performance when you're not getting the performance that you need from your team members. This is career-changing advice in this episode, and I'm so excited to share it with you. Now, before I jump in with Craig, I do want to tell you about AEC PM Connect. This is a premier event where AEC firm leaders can explore real-world strategies to drive performance, empower teams, and lead with purpose. And here's the exciting part. At this event, we'll also be announcing the winners of AEC PM Awards, recognizing professionals who lead with purpose and deliver measurable results. Just imagine someone from your organization being named the AEC PM of the Year. That kind of recognition can really boost your people, your culture, and your organization's reputation in a big way. Our next event will be June 10th, 2026 at Forest Gate Country Club in New Jersey, and we'll have another event in October in Kansas City. You can register at aecpmconnect.com. Again, that's aecpmconnect.com. And if you want to nominate someone for our awards, you can visit aecpmawards.com. I'm your host, Anthony Fasano, and this is the AEC Leadership Podcast. All right, now I'd like to welcome my guest onto the show for today. Craig Casey is the Vice President of Corporate Risk Management at Burns & McDonnell. Craig, welcome to the AEC Leadership Podcast.
Yeah, thanks so much. I'm honored to be here today. Thanks for having me.
I'm really excited to have you. So maybe just to get us started, Craig, you can tell our audience a little bit about yourself and kind of what led you to your current role as VP of Corporate Risk Management at Burns & McDonnell.
Yeah, no, happy to do that. I went to school back in the University of Nebraska at Lincoln, so I'm a Cornhusker fan. We haven't had a lot to cheer about for a while here, but well, except for volleyball. We're good at volleyball. Graduated there in 1991, actually came straight down to Kansas City and started to work for Burns & McDonnell right out of school. Ended up in the middle of our oil, gas, and chemical business. I ended up, doing 40 volts and down electrical engineering, instrumentation and controls, and I think I might have been the first PLC programmer in the division. I ended up leaving the company, long story, happy to, share, but I ended up leaving the company 5 years in. And I went to work for another major crop science client. So I was, again, in heavy industry, was away from the company for about 9 years. I did a lot of distributed control system programming. Came back to the company, came back to Burns & McDonnell, was lucky enough to be offered to come to work for one of many divisions. And I picked one of them, and I ended up working alongside of one of our strongest project managers at the time for one of our biggest clients in the aerospace industry. And we were doing one-of-a-kind design build projects in order to help this client, get up to full rate production and manufacturing a jet fighter. And over that time, I ended up, those projects would ebb and flow. We did well over $1 billion, and work for these folks. But those projects would ebb and flow, and I spent a lot of time building, people, and so that we could support all of these projects. And then when these, when there were less projects in a given time frame, I would go work on, farming up additional clients with the resume that we had built. And we ended up building what was called a manufacturing business. It was heavy aerospace, but we also had a number of other kinds of manufacturing businesses in there where we did complex design build. In that global practice in Burns & McDonnell, the last couple of years I was there, I ran all of our execution and operations, and we were doing about $1 billion a year in revenue. And then I was running to any big problems we had. I was became known as the guy that could actually help, so I would go get in the middle of things and we're to help those, stay on the rails or be on the rails. I got to kind of the end of that time frame, and our corporate risk manager said, "Hey, boy, I don't know if you'd be interested. I could sure use you over in corporate risk." And this gentleman, he was an EPC PM. He went back to law school and got his law degree. He practiced on both sides within the company. He probably helped me over a decade. Probably 800 hours he invested into me. And I thought, you know what, if I can help you and if I can help the company, I'd be happy to come over to corporate risk. So for the last 2 years, I've been leading risk discussions, prior to our projects being proposed, and then also again prior to them signing the final purchase order when we're awarded, to verify that we launch these projects on the rails. And these are projects that carry significant risk, that we would consider to be ones that we'd like to have a little discussion before we propose. So I've got a family, we've got 2 kids, been living here in Kansas City for about 30 years now, and just have really enjoyed it.
That's great. Wow, what an exciting kind of career path and journey. And you've got to see a lot of different things, which is great. And one of the things that you've been heavily involved with, which you alluded to there, is building up people. And at EMI, we do a lot of custom PM development programs and leadership programs. And I think sometimes the words project management, they overshadow the word people, or the idea that, it's not just about managing these tasks and large projects and processes, but it's the people that go into them that are the most important thing. And sometimes we refer to it here at EMI as unlocking people as a leader, building people. And I'd love to hear a little bit about how you've been able to help build people at Burns & McDonnell. I know you got a great process that you use that you and I chatted about, so I'd love you to take our listeners through it.
Yeah, no, happy to do that. And I got to tell you, I stumbled into it, right? In other words, you figured it out along the way. It's kind of like, oh, this works pretty well. And then it was like, well, I'm not sure how you do this any differently, to do this well. But I didn't know this right away, but maybe I'll kind of start with this, and this I think is kind of borne out, online. You can go research this and figure it out. And as soon as I say it, you're going to say, well, yeah, that makes sense. But this idea of how do you grow people optimally? And if you think about this, people really thrive, or they really grow strongly on this knife's edge balance of challenge and support. Too much challenge, people want to throw in the towel and just call it quits. Too much support, well, you're doing it all. I might as well go find something else to do. I'm not learning anything, right? I'm not growing. And so if you can figure out a way to optimize, this challenge and support, you can really help people to grow, strongly. And it really helped. It happened for me over my career, and I'll share a little bit without sharing too much of the details. But we were just getting going on launching a business, and we were figuring it out. We were just getting launched in certain locations, and we had a big project that kicked off. And this project, immediately had some trouble because the senior leadership on the project, ended up with some, just needed to retire, you know. And the client their feathers were ruffled, and so I ended up going and get in the middle of this. But there was a really strong performer that was only about 7 years into their career. And I asked them if they would like to lead this job, and they basically said, well, gosh, I've been looking for opportunities to lead big jobs like this, but boy, this is way beyond me. And I said, well, you know what? I understand that completely. I've done jobs of this order of magnitude, and I feel confident that I could lead this thing. What if you had me to partner with you and walk alongside of you in this? And, he, to his credit, he pretty quickly was like, well, yeah, if I had you, I'd do it. And so then we had some prep to do on this, we had some things to talk about. But basically I said to him, hey, I would really like for you're going to be the PM. I'd like for you to, act in that role. I'd like you to lead. So when we go to these meetings, I'd like you to take your best shot at leading. And I'm telling you, if I can sense in the room that you don't know the answer or that you're uncomfortable, I'll speak. I got you. No worries. I got you. And so that was our plan. We went to this meeting, and literally for 7 weeks in a row, those first 7 weeks, I had to do a lot of talking. Spoke quite a bit. After 7 weeks, he had it. I didn't have to speak after that. And here's kind of the process we followed. And this is really, I think, a practical and pragmatic approach to developing people. So I would go to that meeting with them. I would speak if I had to. The client was very happy I was there because you had some executive sponsorship and somebody that had actually, done projects of this size, complexity, and magnitude, right? So the client was happy to have me in the room. When we finished that meeting, we would go grab lunch together, and I'd say, okay, as we prepare for next week and the next 2 weeks and the next month, like, what did you hear? Like, what did you hear today that we need to plan for? And he'd tell me this list of things. And I'd say, you know what? And of course, I'm looking to encourage him. right, too. So I'd like, boy, I heard all of that, but I missed that one. I'm so glad you heard that one because that's a big one. And I missed that. And I'm glad you caught one. Here's the other things I heard. And oh, by the way, when you said this, did you see the expressions in the room? Did you see kind of all their faces were like, hey, I'm not sure about that. And he's like, yeah, I missed that. And I said, oh, this might be our most important phone call. Like when we get talking right here, getting done talking, we might need to pick up the phone and tell the client, hey, we recognize, that thing that you caught in the meeting there. We're on it. We got it. But through that, then we're able to kind of get him equipped for the next week to get off and running. It didn't mean that I had to do all of it or I had to do any of it, right? He was going to go take off and give it his best effort. And then I would say to him, here's the deal. If you have any questions over the course of the week, come find me. There's no bad questions. I'll respond to you day or night. And so you can see through this, the first thing that I started out with, he had this unbelievable challenge, right? This is something he wasn't going to take on for another 5 years of his career if he was growing organically. But because he had commensurate supports, he was willing to take it on. And this allowed this strong growth because, on this knife's edge balance of challenge and support, you can grow very quickly. So I would estimate over a 5-year period, or over a 1-year period, he grew about 5 years in his capabilities. And what this did for me, it allows us to double the business because at the end of that year, if he could operate at about 75 or 80% of my capacity, you can imagine what he can handle. And then this creates margins so that I can go home. I don't have to do it all, right? And so you can imagine if I could do one or two or three of these at a time while I ran my own job, all of a sudden now. And then if these people really understand this and learn, you can imagine how you can really build a business. And maybe one other really important thing that I'd tell you that I haven't said so far, and I'm not sure everybody really gets this, but if you're an executive sponsor or if you're the person that's the primary mentor, when you've decided, you know what, this person I think actually is a strong person to build into, you need to say, hey, look, if this project fails, I got it. It's on me because I've selected you and I'm supporting you. I'm telling you that I got you. So if this thing fails, it's on me and I'll take the blame. If this thing succeeds, I'm going to dump it all on you, right? And then, so you've created this environment where like this person is going to feel like they're being supported unlike they've ever been supported in their life. And all these accolades are going to follow. And again, I've created all this margin in my life. This has got to all be psychologically safe, but they feel safe then to express their real concerns, the real issues. And then you can really get in the middle of it and help. So that's really the kind of the trick, you've got to go care, you've got to help, you got to take responsibility if it fails, you got to dump the credit on them if it succeeds, and you'll build a lifelong friend and business partner. That's what'll happen.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think the one thing that I really like about this approach is a lot of times as technical professionals, it's hard for us to let go of things, right? It becomes very difficult because we grew up doing calculations and being in the reports. And so, you know, which means we often don't bet on people, right? Because we say, I can do it better than them. So what your approach is, you're betting on that other person and saying, like, listen, I'm going to challenge them and I'm going to support them. And hopefully in a year, they're going to take, light years of advancement and they're going to be able to give me a lot more margin. And I would imagine a lot of the times taking your approach, it happens because of the support you're giving them. But what I love about it is you're kind of overcoming the hurdle that a lot of engineers we fall into, which is it's better if I do it myself. And then you're not challenging the other person and then they're just not going to get that 1 year of growth. It's going to take them the 5 years or longer.
No, that's right. Another thing probably worth mentioning, you have to pick well, right? You have to pick somebody they actually think can do it. So there's another tip that I've learned. You'll recognize people that are emerging in the organization, I would say somewhere in the 4 to 7 year time frame, like they've been assigned some responsibility, and over and over again, their responsibility is handled very well. Team members request them back on the team. The clients want them back on the team. They coordinate and work well with others, and these people are emerging. These are emerging leaders. And when you can spot these people, those are the ones you have to go and have this kind of a conversation with. You have to say this, and I'll tell you why you have to say it. You have to say, I got to tell you, it's not lost on me, and it's not lost on the rest of leadership what you're accomplishing. You're doing amazing work. What would you like to do in this organization? Because people that are succeeding like you are, they get to choose. Here's why you have to say that. If somebody is that talented, they know their value in the marketplace. And if the manager doesn't get it, then they can take their wares internally to another job, or they could leave the company and go take their wares somewhere else because they recognize how valuable they are to the marketplace. And so at least that the manager gets it, that's a good thing, that they want to help them get to where they like to be. That's like, okay, well, I'm encouraged to stay because at least my manager gets it and this company wants to help me get to where I want to get to. And so it really is kind of this 80-20 rule. You've got to pick wisely. Some of the leadership books would say you invest 80% of your time in your top 20% of your people. If you don't pick well, let's just imagine this job that I didn't pick well. Well, I talked for 7 weeks. I talked in 7 weeks of meetings, and then I was able to quit talking. It might have been the case where I didn't get to quit talking, that I had to actually do most of it.
Right.
If I didn't pick well. And then this person might have grown some, but ultimately they might not be likely to ever really be able to lead the whole thing, right? And that's fine. We want to afford people all the opportunities that they can take on. Just some have different levels that they're going to ascend to than others, right? And so you have to pick well. That's another part of it.
And Craig, is picking well a function of experience, basically?
Well, to some degree, there's maybe some key traits that you could key in on. I've already mentioned a couple, like the scopes that they've already had, they're doing them very well. Like, people generally are happy. People that are working with them are very happy. They're doing excellent work. Beyond that, being able to read people and read situations well and react accordingly is important. Like, if you can't read well, it's a problem. Like, hey, client, I'm sure glad you're happy with how it's all going. And the client's going, and they're not reading that. That's a problem, right? And this can be a barrier to growth that can cap your progression in a career. And so these people have got to be able to read well, react well. You got to have some form of humility, recognize you don't know it all, and that you've got to be a continual learner. And then this idea of being continually inquisitive, like, I'm curious about how that works. And you kind of go chase some of these details, right, to understand more deeply how these things work. So got to have some drive, got to treat their sphere of influence well. There's just some of these kinds of things that you'll see, right, in these people that are developing.
Yeah, that's good stuff. And that's you're so right. I mean, the process and approach that you have sounds great, but like you said, you got to pick the right people.
Yeah, that's right.
Transform your technical experts into impactful leaders with EMI's Engineering Leadership Accelerator. Tailored for AEC professionals, this program enhances communication, delegation, and decision-making skills. Flexible, interactive, and designed to fit your team's schedule. Elevate your team's leadership capabilities today. Visit engineeringmanagementinstitute.org and click on corporate training.
Craig, you also talked about building business, right? You've built up business there at Burns and Mac. So can you talk a little bit about how you build a business and, what has kind of guided your strategy? Man, I understand part of it is what you just explained to us, of course, and doing that probably with multiple leaders, but what can you tell us about building business? I think it's a big term sometimes that we hear, but I'd love to get kind of some of the things that you've done to help build it.
Yeah, and thanks for all that. I recognize with the limited time we have here, I'm going to have to be a little bit summary. I'll have to summarize here a little bit. But, I guess one of the primary things that I would say, in order to be a strong leader, there's a book written by John Maxwell called Developing the Leader Within You. And one of the key things he says in that book, and I don't know if it's his original quote or not, but it resonates, and I think it's really true. He says, leadership is influence. If you can influence somebody, then you've actually led them. And then the question becomes, how do you gain this influence, right? And of course, you have to know things. Like, you don't get to gain influence and not know anything, right? It's kind of a given. You have to know some things. But if you know some things, then what? Now, how does this work? And there's this key phrase that he mentions in this book. And I wouldn't tell you that by me telling you this phrase that you shouldn't go read the book, but it does. This is the one thing you don't miss if you read that book. And this was the phrase: people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And so you actually have to care about people. And so it's very difficult. And then he goes through and describes 5 different levels of leadership. And the first one is called positional. It's basically, the only authority you have over me is your position. You'll do what I say because I'm your boss, and I'm not sure I care what you think. And that's the lowest level of leadership. That'll work for a while, but high attrition and low morale follows these kind of people. So you have to care about your people. So then how do you do that? Well, it would probably be smart to organize your leadership structure in manageable spans of care. And the way that I did it, the way that we did it, we never had any more than 8 direct reports. And the reason is because if once you start having 30 direct reports, now you become an administrator and you depart from the market. And you've got to stay connected to the market or you've quit growing. And so if you have, let's say you have 8 reports, you can actually practice some of these techniques that I described in our earlier segment here in terms of challenging them and supporting them and checking in with them and caring about them, right? And you can stay closely connected to the clients and maybe run some of your own things that are, and part of the golden key here is that if you challenge and support people and develop them in such a way that they become 80% of your capabilities or more, that you actually duplicate yourself into them, you create margin for yourself and you allow yourself to take on even more challenging things, which keeps you on this kind of a growth path. And that's the kind of growth path you want to be on because the y-axis represents your value to the market and your compensation. And as soon as you start to level off like this, I mean, don't be surprised when your raise is 3%, right? This is your value to the market, right? Year over year. So you got to get comfortable being uncomfortable and stay challenged. So those are a couple of keys in it. And then I would say, do excellent work. Be great at what you do. Of course, you'd like to make a profit on the jobs you're working on, but at the end of the day, one of the primary key metrics that's probably worth measuring is, did you win the next job?
Right.
Because if you didn't win the next job, you're on the going out of business cycle, right? And if you win the next job, you probably have a stronger chance of earning some additional profit because now you know them and they know you. You know how they think. The next job's probably easier. So you work towards winning the next job. So then you build that client. You begin to build like clients. And then you can be, that's called a market, by the way. So then you can become a market leader. And you can judge that by various industry standards like Engineering News Record or others. And then you can use those resumes to begin to build new clients that are in adjacent markets, right? And so then this is how you build business. That's very curt summary. I've got additional strategies, but those are at least some talking points.
No, those are some amazing talking points. And a couple things that I want to just hit on or reinforce from that I think are really important is the one on direct reports, I think, is a big one. I actually read the book a few times, High Output Management by Andrew Grove, who was the CEO of Intel. And he talks a lot about this idea of not overwhelming yourself with too many direct reports. And I think that, unfortunately, in our world, sometimes people see it kind of like as a badge of honor, like I've got all these direct reports. In fact, I remember doing a training once for a company, and one of the managers said, I'm managing 30 people. And the CEO stood up and said, well, we got to fix that. Right? Like he thought it was a great thing. And the CEO said no. So I think for those of you out there that may feel overwhelmed, you're getting spread out too much, you'll probably be much more effective if there's less direct reports that you can pour your energy and efforts into. And maybe, to Craig's point, some of those you can challenge with managing some of the other people you're managing, right? And that's your challenge and support basis. So that's one thing that you can definitely do that I think is really, really important. And the other thing that Craig said that I just want to hit on that's so important is the idea of winning the next project. Like I said, we do a lot of work here with developing project managers who are, a lot of times the main person who's the contact for the client, right? So they're delivering the project to the client. And then if, by the way, they do a good job, they're the one with the relationship that can bring them in for more work. And most AEC organizations are going to survive or not based on repeat work. I mean, that's the business that we're in, right? We're in the relationship business. And so if you're a project manager, do not think that winning business is not your job, because it is your job. So yes, delivering projects is your job, but you're building the relationship with the client that's going to hopefully bring them back for that project. And like Craig said, it'll probably be more profitable because now you know them.
That's right. That's right.
So lots of good points there from Craig. And, like Craig said, we could do an episode on each of these and spend hours on it, but I'm trying to just get some information from Craig from his, vast experience here. So Craig, let's move on, because something else I want to talk about that I think is really important in leadership is performance management. And, people have their annual or whatever performance reviews that their company may set up for them, and they fill out the form and they go through the process. And I'm sure there's some value to that, but just from your takeaways, what do you think are some of the most important avenues of performance management? And as a follow-up to that, I want to talk about poor performance and how it's addressed. So maybe you can start with performance management and your take on it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Again, lots we could talk about here. One of the primary things that I think that managers may get confused on, is they have a bell curve of people that might come to work for them. In other words, some are extremely talented and some are, down the learning curve quite a ways and, maybe are not achieving full potential, right? I think one of the primary things that has to happen kind of right out of the chute is that you have to give people work to do that is commensurate with their level in the organization. And then they get judged based on that. Right? In other words, you can't, I'll just make up some levels here, right? But let's say your levels are from 8 to 20 in an organization. And by the time someone's a level 14, that's pretty progressed. If somebody's a level 14, but they're not really doing awesome, you can't give them work that they're able to do, like work that a level 12 would do, and call and say that they had a great year. Can't do that. You have to judge that based on the level of work they gave them. And you'll see this happen. It'll work out systematically and pragmatically how it just works out anyway, because what'll happen is the project managers say, hey, we keep giving this level 14 work to do that these level 12s are doing really well on. I'd rather have the level 12s because I don't have to charge so much for them, and we're more competitive in the marketplace if I use them, right? And so you can see even it just works itself out, but you have to give people work to do that is commensurate with their level and then judge them against that. If they do well against that, they get the accolades of that. And if they don't do well, then you have to say, we appreciate the work you are doing, but honestly, we've got folks doing the work that are levels below you. They're doing the same job. And you can see me kind of smiling through this conversation. This is maybe another tip I'd give people. You can say a lot of hard things if you're smiling. Like it conveys, I still love you. I'm still with you. But I got to tell you the truth too. This is the truth, right? That's one key, that you have to judge people fairly and accurately and with regard to giving them work to do that's commensurate with their level. Secondly, you need to be in constant communication over the course of the year. It's not enough to not talk to them for 6 months and then have some performance review at the end of the year that completely shocks them.
Right.
Or they're happy with, either way is fine, but the first one is not good, right? You didn't talk to them and all of a sudden getting a bad review or less than they thought they should have gotten. So you have to be in continual communication. This idea of a report structure that's manageable, where you got 6 or 8 people reporting to you or even less, but not more than that, right? This keeps you in touch with them, right? So that's a good thing. And then when you do get towards the end of, towards the time of performance review, I like to do a 360 review. Like I like to request feedback from people that work in their sphere of influence, above them, beside them, and below them. Because it's not enough to treat the people in your sphere of influence well that are above you. You have to treat your entire sphere well, right? Otherwise, it's not good. So what I do is I take that feedback. I tell all those people, hey, look, I appreciate the feedback, need it. I will make it so that it's that they can't tell who gave the feedback. Like I'll sterilize it. I'll make it so generic they can't tell who provided this feedback. But in giving them this feedback, they really get this honest view, of their sphere, their sphere of influence, of these folks that they work with all the time. And honestly, that's just helpful. It's just, and I'll mention this too. Like if anybody comes and anybody that ever comes and offers you some constructive criticism face to face, know that that's very hard for them to do. Like it's not my favorite thing to do, to walk around and tell people, you can improve in this way, right? But when somebody does that, you have to recognize that was hard for them to come tell you that. And your response to that should pretty immediately be, thank you so much for this. Thank you. Now, when you go away, it doesn't mean that you have to do exactly what they identified. You can go home and think about that on your own and recognize, do I need to improve in that regard or not? It's a little data point here, though, because somebody's saying they're recognizing this. Is that true or not? You can decide what you want to do with that information, but the fact that they came and told you, it was hard for them to tell you, and they might have given you a golden nugget here that really helped you. So the response is thank you. So similarly, on these performance reviews, when the 360 feedback comes in, there's some coaching of the folks. If there's any constructive criticism in there, that these are helpful. Like this is worth its weight in gold.
Yeah.
Because if there are some corrections to make here and you make them, and all of a sudden, like you're great with your entire sphere of influence and this thing is clicking, right? So anyway, those are some tips, on the development of people.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that again, great stuff there. And a couple things that I'll point out from some of my experience with doing a lot of leadership work is that point about giving the feedback often and consistently as opposed to kind of waiting till the 1 year performance review or waiting till the end of a project, I think is so important because, we can't expect people to improve unless we're giving them the feedback. And it really has to be done in a timely manner because, if someone does something and then 2 months later you're going to give them feedback on it, it's not really that useful. So I think that that's a big pitfall that I've seen with leaders. So if you're a leader and you're leading a team, you're managing a project, give people feedback consistently. And listen, you could give them positive feedback and you can give them critical feedback, but just keep the feedback loop open. And the other thing that I would encourage you to do as well is ask for feedback yourself, right? I mean, like whether it's from your supervisor or even from someone that you're leading, because to Craig's point, like it's not easy for people to give you feedback, especially critical feedback. So if you can make them comfortable, it is, like you said, a gold nugget that you might get from someone that pushes you to build a skill that maybe you didn't realize you weren't as good as you could be at. So I think the whole concept of feedback and performance management is critical, and we need to give it as leaders, but we also need to get it ourselves and keep building up.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. In fact, I might even say, it's a really strong leadership attribute is to ask some self-effacing questions like, hey, is there anything I'm doing or not doing that's getting in your way or letting you down? Is there anything I need to do better to serve you? And this is not an every other day question. This is a once every 2 weeks or 3 weeks or once every 2 months, occasionally. But you ask this question to create this psychologically safe environment to allow the feedback and any feedback that would come to, create some potential corrections that would just help the thing just be better, right? So, as a leader, you've got to, I think, ask some of these self-effacing questions at times to your folks. Hey, is there anything I'm doing that's letting you down? And you can see I'm smiling again, right? This is a good thing to keep doing, right? Am I hurting you in any way? It really helped me to know that I don't want to do that, right?
Yeah, that's great. And I guess one last question on this, which you kind of covered a little bit. If you do have that team member that's maybe is not performing well for whatever reason, and you are going to get together with them to have a serious conversation about it, the first thing I've already taken away from you is you should smile during that conversation.
Yeah.
But the other thing I'd ask you about it is there any kind of like general approach or, energy you bring into that conversation to keep it positive, but also let them know that, you're looking for improvements?
Yeah, no, appreciate that. So we've kind of touched on, a lot of it in terms of the regular communications, but I think, if you've got superstar strong performers, you don't necessarily have to go schedule an every other week meeting or every third week meeting because they'll come and find you. You'll find them. It's going well. They're not going to get surprised at the end of the year. If you have folks that aren't doing so well, then it is important that you're even more intentional about trying to set these times up. So you might block every other week, half an hour, or every third week, a half an hour to sit down and keep talking about it. And, I'll role play here just a little bit with you, but you can imagine how the conversation goes in these two different ways. Like, if the first way is like, man, you better get this fixed or you're going to be fired. This is unacceptable. And you can see my tone and it's just like, I probably ought to start looking for a new job today, right? That's what you're conveying. I've never done that. I'm not saying there's never a time and a place for that, but I just wouldn't do that. The other side of it is, hey, look, we probably have a few things we need to work on. And you can hear me saying the word we, right? So and then, this is kind of the same principle with your kids, right? You don't tell your kids they're lousy people. You tell them these things that are happening aren't good, right? And so you start to point out the things that need to be corrected. And so what I found is that, yeah, these conversations aren't necessarily comfortable, but as long as you're speaking the truth, like this is actually true, right? Then the conversation is at least right. It's healthy. They're like, oh, okay, I see your point. I get it. I probably have a few things to work on there, right? And many times, after a few conversations, this thing gets corrected. Like they don't want to do bad. They don't want to do poorly. So they go fix it. Other times the conversation goes for a while, right? And then at year-end review, as you start to do that performance review, then you're saying, as we've been talking, we're all aware that we're working on these things. And so in these areas, I've given you a 2 or a 3, not a 5, right? But then they understand because we have these conversations, going for quite some time, right? At least they understand that it makes sense that that's where we're at. It's not a surprise. So that's kind of the deal. You just have to, you're trying to help everybody become all they can be, but you also can't shy away or be afraid of these constructive conversations. But there's a good way to do it and a bad way to do it too, right?
Yeah. And I love the use of the word we. I think that's so important because it keeps you on the same team, right? We're working together. Let's go back to the support that you start off the conversation with today, right? The challenge versus the support. So that's great. All right, Craig, last question I have for you. So we talked about a lot of great stuff here. And, like I said, this could have been a 5-hour episode, but we're trying to keep it within the lines here. But what I would say is, let's say you had a phone call with a leader in the industry, kind of an up and coming leader, and you only had a couple of minutes to chat with them, and you had to impart some type of advice in terms of how to develop themselves as a leader. Based on all your kind of years of experience and the stuff that we talked about for the last half hour or so, what are some of the key takeaways that you would impart upon that person in terms of developing as a leader?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I've already kind of alluded to them, maybe indirectly, but maybe I'll talk about some of those very directly right now. When you come out of school, and I'll just say school, everybody comes from somewhere, right? But generally, when you start a new job, everything is new. And you're on this crazy step curve of learning. Like when I came out of college with my electrical engineering degree, I knew all this theory, all this applied calculus. And I came in, to Burns and McDonnell here, and we started talking about hey, on this motor control center, I want you to take this cubicle and tell the contractor. And I said, okay, well, time out. What's a motor control center? Silly question for an electrical engineer. Crazy. I didn't know. Didn't get talked about in college. What's a contractor? Didn't know. you know. But when you come out of school, all of a sudden you leave all this theory and you're into this very practical. I think they're doing a lot better today in colleges and aligning kids with people that are in industry as mentors, et cetera, so that they get a little bit better start. But I found myself wondering, what did my college even teach me? I was almost mad, about what happened in college. But anyway, you come out and you're on this step curve, and you're learning like this. And if they give you some things to do and you're on repeat with these things to do, eventually you just kind of bend over this curve. And like you're growing like this, and all of a sudden you're like this, because you're doing lighting design for the 10th time. Well, I'm not learning very much on the 10th time in that ride. And I think ideally you want to stay on this path because, again, I mentioned this earlier, the y-axis of this is your value to the marketplace and your compensation. So as you just get comfortable and do the same thing on repeat, you're only worth 2 or 3% more per year. Just it is what it is. And so
Right.
if you can begin to give away those things you've done 10 times, challenge and support those people that have never done them, and take on new things, you can become comfortable being uncomfortable, stay on this path of continual learning, of challenge. Because the longer you can stay on that path, the higher your value to the marketplace and your comp will follow that. So that's one bit of advice. You got to try to stay challenged. If you feel like, man, my job's just easy and I'm not learning much, you're just not, that's not it. You don't want to be there. So that's one. Align yourself with some strong leaders that can actually challenge you and, take you into some things that are difficult, but give you the support you need. That's one. The other one that I would say is very generic, but it's so true, I think. The first one is be excellent at what you do. Whatever you do, be great at it, right? Because if you're great at it, that's job security, right? No one's going to want to fire you or let you go if you're great at it. And then the other one that goes hand in hand with it, number two, is have strong relationships, make friends, be excellent, make friends. So what happens is if you ever find yourself in a time where you're running out of work and you're like, man, I could use a little extra work. If you're excellent and you've made friends, your friends will say, well, come on over here. We could use you.
That's right.
If you're not excellent and you haven't made friends, people are like, well, I'm sorry you're out of work.
Yeah,
But yeah,
I mean, I hate to say it, but when you look to hire a new person, usually you're not hiring someone who's out of work. You're hiring someone you want to hire someone who's in work because they're in work for a reason, right?
So it's pretty trivial to say. Those three things would be giant points, I think. Stay challenged, stay on this career growth path, be excellent at whatever you're doing, and make friends. Have strong relationships with your entire sphere of influence. And I think if you do those things, it's hard to miss.
Yeah.
It's hard to not be successful.
That's great stuff. And I really like the visual of, staying more on the vertical career curve as opposed to the horizontal one, right? Because
Yeah.
you can get really good at something and then be comfortable doing it and just keep yourself there. But if you have a good leader who's pushing you and you're receptive to challenges, I think that that's a good recipe for keeping you on the more of the vertical curve and heading upwards in your career in the market value, as you suggest, which is, I think, a great takeaway. So, Craig, you covered some amazing stuff here. Once again, Craig Casey, Vice President of Corporate Risk Management at Burns & McDonnell. Craig, You've got a lot of wisdom, a lot of leadership. I know it took a lot of years to get it and a lot of hard work. And I appreciate you coming on the AEC Leadership Podcast and sharing it with our listeners.
Oh, just an honor to be here today. Thank you so much for having me.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Craig. He is an amazing leader and he's done a lot of great things in his career. And we were really, really lucky to have him with us. And if you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to our channel here. We do put out videos like this on a weekly basis to help technical professionals become better managers and leaders. I'll see you next week.